Welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. Hi, I'm Michael.
This is Barbara.
And I'm Lauren.
We have hit 1 year. Guys, this is our 1 year anniversary for this little podcast. And to celebrate, we want to do something special. We're going to do a drawing on our socials. The prize will be to win a copy of a book from one of our upcoming episodes, or a new recommendation from you. And if you'd like, you can be a guest host on that episode. The rules will be specific and more on our post, so don't forget to check out our Facebook and our Instagram and enter.
Woo.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Okay, so this month we read We Were the Lucky Ones by Georgia Hunter. It was recommended to us by a listener, and you can follow at Scram13. So thank you for the recommendation.
Like normal, we'll split the podcast into two sections. The first part will be a spoiler-free discussion and our overall group score, and then the second part will be a more in-depth discussion of the plot and the ending, which is obviously going to be spoiler-heavy, as well as our individual scores for the book. But first, let's talk about the author. So the author of this book was Georgia Hunter, and the bio that I was able to find for this is written in first person from her perspective. So I'm going to be using I, but I'm speaking as Georgia Hunter. For as long as I can remember, I've loved to write. I penned my first novel, in quotes, when I was 4 years old and titled it Charlie Walks the Beast, after my father's recently published sci-fi novel, Softly Walks the Beast. When I was 11, I pitched an article, an opinion piece, on how I would spend my last day, if the world were about to come to an end, to the local newspaper. Since that debut in the Attleboro Sun Chronicle, my personal essays and photos have been featured in places like the New York Times, Why We Travel, in Travel Girl magazine, and on equitrekking.com. I've also taken on the role of freelance copywriter in the world of adventure travel, crafting marketing materials for outfitters such as Austin Adventures, as well as the Explorer's Passage. In 2000, a family reunion opened my eyes to the astounding war stories of my grandfather and his family. 8 years later, armed with a digital voice recorder and a moleskin notebook, I set off to unearth and record my family's story. I spent nearly a decade traversing the globe, interviewing family, and digging up records from every possible source I could think of, eventually piecing together the bones of what would become my novel, We Were the Lucky Ones. I kept a blog as my research unfolded, which you are welcome to peruse, and I've also created a list of ancestry search tips should you consider embarking on a journey to uncover your own roots. I hope you enjoy the book, and I'd love to hear from you if you have any questions or stories of your own to share. So that is a little bit about her. This is her first novel she's ever written. You can tell her background was in journalism and copywriting before this. So she has always been a writer, but this is her first time doing a book after she discovered this story inside her own family. And now over to Barbara to talk about some of the accolades and awards.
Okay, so this was originally published on February 14th of 2017. The genre is considered historical fiction, biographical fiction, and Jewish fiction. It is 418 pages, and it has a 4.4 out of 5 rating on Goodreads, or a 4.7 out of 5 on Amazon. And it was nominated for the Goodreads Choice Award for this historical fiction in 2017, and she was nominated for Goodreads Choice Award nominee for a debut author in 2017 as well.
Over to Lauren to talk about the jacket cover / back of the book.
All right. The back of the book says as follows. It is the spring of 1939, and 3 generations of the Kirk family are doing their best to live normal lives, even as the shadow of war grows closer. The talk around the family cedar table is of new babies and budding romance, not of the increasing hardships threatening Jews in their hometown of Radom, Poland. But soon, the horrors overtaking Europe will become inescapable, and the Kirks will be flung to the far corners of the world, each desperately trying to navigate his or her own path to safety. As one sibling is forced into exile, another attempts to flee the continent, while others struggle to escape certain death, either by working grueling hours on empty stomachs in the factories of the ghetto, or by hiding as Gentiles in plain sight. Driven by an unwavering will to survive and by the fear that they may never see one another again, the Kirks must rely on hope, ingenuity, and inner strength to persevere. An extraordinary propulsive novel, We Were the Lucky Ones, demonstrates how, in the face of the 20th century's darkest moment, the human spirit can endure and even thrive.
So, as we dive in here, what did you guys think of the Lucky Ones? And remember, this is the first part, so no spoilers. So I guess I'll go first. I really liked the book. Going into this when it was first recommended, I didn't know Oh, I would like it because the truth because of a title, and then I did a little bit of research on what the book actually was, and I got really excited because I love historical fiction and I love World War II history specifically. So I was really excited to read a true story about a family that went through this part of history. Um, so I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a very compelling story that her family went through. I thought that it was the story itself was well written. The author's writing style, I'm not going to go into this a ton because I know Barbara's going to go into it, was a little bit off-putting at times, just because of the way that she wrote it. It would be like if you were reading someone's like after action report about something that happened, as opposed to actually experiencing it as that person in first person. And so that was kind of frustrating. But when I was able to get over that, I really enjoyed the story. I thought the characters were amazing, and they're obviously real people, so that made it even cooler. But overall, I really liked the book.
So it might sound odd, but I've always loved consuming any kind of media about the Holocaust, like movies, books, TV shows. It was always my favorite subject in history classes. And when I was studying abroad in England, I actually got the opportunity to go to Poland and see Auschwitz and Birkenau concentration camps in person, which was a crazy, indescribable, and super chilling experience. I find the subject to obviously be very dark, but also intriguing. And I think that it's really important to continue to teach about it so that history doesn't repeat itself. I feel like a lot of the kids, when I was teaching before I got my master's, didn't have any idea what it was, even fourth graders, which getting to that point, I mean, you have to teach about World War II to an extent. But anyway, that being said, I enjoyed the book overall. I think it was well written. I think, like Michael said, that there's a little bit of point of view weirdness, but it wasn't so much that I was too distracted to enjoy the book. There were a lot of instances where I physically felt sick based off of like descriptions that the author was making about various happenings, and I realize now that in my notes I elaborated on that, but I shouldn't because that might be a spoiler. So I'm just going to leave it at that there were times where I physically felt like my stomach turn. And so, when a book affects you physically like that and pulls that kind of emotion, that the author has some talent, especially this is a first book. All of that being said, though, the moments of vivid description like that didn't happen quite often enough for me. They were kind of few and far between. And then the writing style was sometimes confusing and difficult to follow just because there were so many characters. And I know that this was based on a family's experience. And so obviously, like, the author probably felt like they had to include all of the characters. But it would have been nice to have more focused, in-depth experience with characters. And then obviously I'm grateful that there were families that had the experience that they did with the happy ending. But for readers who pick up this book and don't have knowledge about the horrors of the Holocaust outside of just, picking up a book about it, it might be dangerous or damaging to send this message that like all these happy endings were common. Because the vast majority of endings were not like that in World War II. So that was kind of my take.
So I was excited to read it because I really like historical fiction. I like reading anything, but I really enjoy historical fiction because I feel like it probes me to research stuff and get into that time period of what I'm reading about. So I was really excited to read this book. It was really difficult for me to get into this book at first, though, because it's written in a third-person present tense point of view. And I believe Hunter did this with the wish for an increase in tension, because that's normally what you get with that point of view. So the story is happening in real time as we, the readers, read it. I just feel like it didn't work well for this book. I don't think it fit well. But overall, the story is amazing and really mind-blowing to think about with what the family went through. And it is obviously based on what actually happened to her family, the author's family, as one of the characters was her grandfather, and that's not a spoiler. You can literally Google that. I love historical fiction, so I kept finding myself Googling things to know more about what was going on and more about what was happening. And like Lauren mentioned, it can be hard to read since this stuff really did happen in our history, and it's sad to think about all those people who experienced this, or obviously much worse. I just wish it was written a bit better because I felt like I was being told a story rather than experiencing it. And I feel like the author didn't really use any descriptive words, but rather just told us what the character felt instead of just making the reader experience it as well. But overall, I really enjoyed reading it.
Okay, so as you guys know, we don't go into our individual scores at this point in the podcast. We'll save that for later. But our group score for this one was a 7.9 out of 10. I'm just happy that it was just a single decimal point instead of the craziness that was last episode. So the next question is, would you recommend this book? And I'm going to let Barbara start on this one.
Oh yeah, 100%. I do think there are better written stories about, World War II or the Holocaust in general. But this family story is so interesting that I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who likes this genre. It's just mind-blowing to me what happened to this family. So, and I just really enjoyed reading about them, and so I would 100% recommend it if you can get past the awkward point of view.
Lauren, what about you?
I would definitely recommend it. Like Barbara mentioned, it was a little bit slow to get started. And then there were several parts that I feel like seemed to include a lot of anecdotal information that maybe wasn't necessary and kind of caused it to drag along in certain parts. But overall, I enjoyed it. And I would recommend it particularly to friends who enjoy historical fiction, but also just people in general. I was able to look past, like I said before, some of the writing issues because I enjoyed the overall storyline. And I also enjoyed the fact that it was based on true events. And so I think those two things combined helped me to kind of get over some of the nitpicky stuff that I was feeling.
Yeah.
Same here. I was actually going to say something similar to that. So first, yes, I would recommend it. In fact, I've already recommended the book to like 3 people after finishing reading it. So I would definitely recommend it. The only caveat would be if you're someone who just absolutely hates stuff that's based on truth and history. And there are some people that don't like reading that stuff. They want to read to escape, and it's hard to escape when you're reading about things that actually happened for some people. So
You monsters.
if that is you, then I wouldn't recommend it. But otherwise, I would. It was a fantastic book. There were some hiccups in the writing style that weren't great, but you had to remember as you were reading that, this is her first time writing, first time writing a novel. And the fact, like Lauren said, that the story itself was so compelling, and the characters, and the fact that it's based on a true story, all helped to overlook some of those inadequacies. But yeah, overall, I would definitely recommend the book. So that's the first part of our podcast. It's kind of hard to talk about this one very much because the spoilers start to happen relatively quickly. I mean, if you can call them spoilers, it's a true story. So if you Google it, then you'd find all of it as fact. But for those of you leaving us at this point because you're going to go read the book, don't forget to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen if you like us. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook as well as Instagram. In both places, our handle is @BadassLitPod. We'd love to hear from you. If you've got a book you want us to read, let us know. To be honest, when it comes to recommendations, I'd love to have a list like 3 pages long. That would be so cool to just have nonstop books. We've got a lot right now, but I'd love to have more.
And enter to win our prize for our 1-year anniversary.
Help us celebrate.
Help us celebrate. So don't forget to check that out. Like I said earlier, the rules will be on there as far as what you have to do to enter. We're really excited about this and can't wait to see all you guys' entries.
And it's crazy to think we've been doing this for a year.
Yes, it is. It is
I
crazy.
made a whole human in that amount of time.
And now Lauren is going to give us a short preview of what we've got coming up.
All right. Next month, we are reading Hogfather by Terry Pratchett, which was recommended to us by a listener at None More Glitter. I think that's how you say it. Preview of Hogfather. Susan had never hung up a stocking. She'd never put a tooth under her pillow in the serious expectation that a dentally inclined fairy would turn up. It wasn't that her parents didn't believe in such things. They didn't need to believe in them. They knew they existed. They just wished they didn't. There are those who believe and those who don't. Through the ages, superstition has had its uses, nowhere more so than in the Discworld, where it's helped to maintain the status quo. Anything that undermines superstition has to be viewed with some caution. There may be consequences, particularly on the last night of the year when the time is turning. When those consequences turn out to be the end of the world, you need to be prepared. You might even want more standing between you and oblivion than a mere slip of a girl, even if she has looked death in the face on numerous occasions. Dun, dun,
Mm.
I'm excited to read this one, so tune in next month for Hogfather. And remember, the second part of our podcast is going to be an in-depth look at the book, so if you don't want spoilers and you want to go read this, stop listening right now and come back and listen to us when you're done. That was a fair break. If you're not gone, it's your fault. Now, for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go. Our first question for this one is just going to be kind of skimming the surface like normal. So what did you like about this book? What did you dislike about the book? And the only difference here is, was there a specific point in the story like where it really got its hooks in you? And I'm going to let Lauren go first on this one.
I enjoyed that it was based on true events, and like I said, the overall subject matter. I like to read and learn more about World War II. I liked the detailed descriptions, but they didn't happen often enough. And when I'm talking about the detailed descriptions, I'll go back up to where I accidentally almost spoiled it earlier. But just like when the author is describing the situation when they're on the boat, standing in excrement and vomit, or describing the smell of the burning bodies, or like the heart-wrenching description of Felicia being separated from her mom and embraced by like the stranger, that really got me in my postpartum hormonal self. I actually like cried a couple times reading this book. So there were some really vivid images, which I really appreciated. And I just felt like they didn't happen often enough. Like it wasn't consistent. I think, Barbara, you were the one that said earlier that like the author was more telling you how you should feel rather than like having you experience it. And I felt like in these types of moments, I was really experiencing it. And then the rest of the time it was kind of like you described, where it's just like, oh, they were sad. They were said it with anger. So that was my one gripe. I also disliked the pacing. Sometimes it seemed off. I don't know. It wasn't like it was super slow like some of the ones that we've read in the past, so I don't really know how to describe it other than just I felt like the pacing seemed off. I mean, there were slow points throughout, but it wasn't like it dragged along like some of Michael's picks.
That's tired.
I disliked the fact that there were so many characters and we never really got to delve into them, like at the level that I would have preferred. I feel like we got a lot of surface level information and a lot of anecdotal stuff, and not like I feel like it would have been more beneficial to the readers to have like 3 or 4 really main characters to focus on rather than kind of bouncing between what is there, like 6 or 7 or 8 even.
There's a few, because like the family has 3 boys, 2 girls, and then their spouses or significant others, and then the mom and dad. So quite a bit.
Yeah, there's a lot.
So I felt like the author likely felt the need to include all of them because it was based on her family, and she did like 10 years worth of research on her family to write this novel. So I totally understand why she did it the way she did it, but I feel like for readers' sake, it would have been better to have a little bit more of a deeper focus on a few characters. But for the most part, I really enjoyed reading it. And don't really have a whole lot of big complaints. And as far as like a point that really hooked me, I don't know that there was any one point necessarily, other than just when we would get those random, like really descriptive pieces that kept me reading and kept me interested.
Love this story as a whole. It was very interesting to read through this part of World War II from a family's perspective, and even more so because this particular family happened to be, scattered across the globe, experiencing different things. So that was really neat to get that really unique experience from these different people that were everywhere throughout World War II's history. The only thing I didn't like about the book I mentioned earlier was it's just the tense that the author wrote it in and the way that she described it. Again, I know Barbara will probably talk more about this here, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but that was really my only dislike. I love World War II history, so I was hooked from the get-go. I was excited reading the description for this book, so didn't really need to get its hooks in me. That's not to say it didn't, and that there weren't, like Lauren mentioned, she cried a couple times. Like, I don't think I've ever cried during a book, but I did actually a couple times during this. During happy moments, at the end when the family reunites, multiple times. There's a bunch of reunion scenes, and those got me. But yeah, it was a really good story. Were there slow points? Absolutely, but I was excited to read this from the start.
I think I've kind of covered what I liked and what I disliked. I really liked that it was based off of actual true events. Like, this actually happened to these people. And it's crazy to think about, like, while you're reading that. Like, the whole time I was just in shock. Because, yeah, like, we study this stuff, but you don't study it in that point of view. It's an overall, you study, this is what happened, here's the facts. You don't get to experience it, like, with like these characters, you're seeing what they saw, you're experiencing what they experienced. So I thought that was really interesting. I really enjoyed that. It was a little difficult, like I mentioned, to get started with the book. It was hard for me to want to keep reading in the beginning, just because I felt like it was a little slow, and then the point of view was just really messing me up because it just wasn't working for me until I could teach my brain to get over that fact. It was kind of hard. I did enjoy the historical aspect of it. I feel like descriptive wise, she's no Stephen King. Like, when he is overly descriptive, I feel like she could have used a bit of that, because I wanted to feel what they were experiencing, not being told, like, oh, Jacob is scared as he reaches for the door. Like, tell me why he's scared. Show me how he's scared. Like, is his heart, like, going a mile a minute because he's anxious? Like, is there cold sweat dripping down his back? That kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff I was looking for, because it would have felt to me more of that type of a book versus just her recounting what happened to these characters. And that's my only gripe that I honestly had with it, that and the point of view. As far as what part of the story that got me hooked into it was probably when Helena and Franco were crossing the river. That's when I first started to be like, okay, like, this is crazy. Like, they're risking frostbite and all these crazy things to get across this river when they shouldn't have been doing that. Like, it was illegal for them to have done that, and they did it. They almost lost, like, the money that they were trying to carry through with them in the river, but, like, Helena, like, dives in and grabs it, and then they, get stopped by these Russian soldiers, and they had to deal with that. And I was just like, nice. I'm super excited now to read, like, how this family is going to make it out of this. So
that was a good point. That was, like, a good, exciting, like, I'm remembering that.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout this book, there are several examples of strangers who put their lives at risk to help the Kirks, such as the Gorskys, who take Saul and Neshuma into hiding, the Mother Superior, who allows Felicia into her convent, and then Erden, who vouches for Helena's Aryan identity. What would you have done if you had been in these characters' shoes? And also, what motivates people to put themselves on the line despite the deadly risks of getting caught to help people in need? And I'm going to let Barbara start on this one.
I just feel like that's kind of hard to answer, because we always think we're somebody until we're put in that position. So, while I sit here in my comfortable home, not being threatened with my life, I would love to say that I would help them, and I would hope I would. I feel like deep down, if push comes to shove, I feel like I would help these people. And I think the reason why they did was just the kindness that you feel towards other, like knowing that that could have been you in that position and hoping that someone else would help you out, just like these people were helping them. And I would hope, better human nature, that you would want to help these people out, because that could be your brother or your sister or your mom and dad who need that help, or your child, and you're so desperate to want to help those people because you should be able to put yourself in their shoes to help them. So, and I would like to think that I would do that. I mean, career path wise, you don't pick nursing for the money, I'll tell you that much. So
I mean, like Barbara said, I'd love to say that I would have done the same thing, but I don't think that anybody knows until they're put into that situation. And you're asking, yourself to put yourself and your family and loved ones on the lines for somebody else. And so I'd like to say that I would have been brave and courageous and done those things like these characters did, but it's hard to know. I'm thankful that I've never had to live through a moment like this in history. I'd like to think that if I did, I would be able to, like Barbara said, put myself in their shoes and, just show some human compassion and try to help my fellow man. And you know what, if that turns out that we all get killed because of it, then at least, I died doing the right thing. And so I'd like to think that I would do that. I strive to be a kind, helpful person, and I hope this means that I would have opened my home and my heart to these people, regardless of, what could have happened.
So my answer to this would have been different, like 6 months ago. But like, I've always had a passion for helping kids. It's reflected in my career path, and just for helping people in general. Like, I'm doing counseling now of all ages. But I absolutely would have taken Felicia in and kept her safe, the child. Like, I can say that with certainty, and that's the only thing I can say with certainty. And I couldn't have maybe said that with certainty before having my daughter Eliana. I don't know why, but becoming a mother kind of flipped a switch for me, and my like motherly instincts, or whatever you want to call them. I wouldn't be able to ignore that for a child in need in that situation. I would like to say that I would open my home to adults and families and whoever else needed to be hidden. And thankfully, like Michael said, I've not experienced anything like that, but that's hard to say. I think the motivation to do that is rooted in kindness and empathy, both of which I feel like I possess. So I would like to say that I would take anyone that needed help in. But the only one that I can say for almost certain, I think, would be that situation where Mila was like digging her grave. And I know that that's not the necessarily like the Catholic thing, but with allowing the stranger to take Felicia, like in that moment, like that, I would have done that hands down.
That was a hard one to read, that part where she was digging a grave for them both.
Oh man, yeah, that was a really, really intense chapter. I think that was really probably the only point in the book where I wondered, like, are they not going to make it? Like,
Oh no, I figured they'd make it, but I was very curious what the hell she was going to do to get out of that, because I was like, this is obviously like they're going to get shot, and I was like, what the hell does she have to do? Like, what is she going to muster up to save her child?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. It's like, based on the title of the book, that they make it out, right? Because we're the lucky ones.
Right. See, that's what I said. I was like, it took a little bit out of the, what is the word I'm looking for? The suspension, because it's all, we're the lucky ones. So obviously, I assumed everyone made it.
Yeah, that was a difficult chapter for me. I think James came up, and I was like, crying, and he was like, what is wrong? And I'm like, she's digging her grave for her baby. It was awful.
Yeah.
And just like thinking of being in that situation where you literally would be willing to give your child to a stranger if it meant that they could live. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just, crazy.
Moving on from there, the next question is, most historical fiction is written in past tense. Why do you think the author chose to write this story in the present? And what impact, if any, did it have on your reading experience? So I guess I can go first on this one. I don't have a whole lot to say about this. I think that she chose present tense to make, with the intention of making it more intense for the reader, making the experience more intense. I think that she kind of fell short with that just because of the way that it was written. And I think that it may have been better if it had been written in past tense instead of present tense. But after reading a little while, I mean, I was able to enjoy the story just fine. But that's really the only thing I have to say about that one.
I feel like I already kind of answered this already because that was one of like my strong gripe with the book was the tense that she used. Like I said, I believe she did this to increase the tension in the story because that is one of the reasons you do that. So like we as readers are supposed to feel like we are right there in the action as all these stuff are taking place. But I just don't think she pulled it off well. I really don't think she did. Honestly, like I think it was maybe the first few chapters I would finish reading and just like scream, and I would like walk over to Michael and be like, "Oh my gosh, have you like read this yet? Like the tense is really throwing me off. It's like really bothering me." And he's like, "Wow, okay, get over yourself." So that happened. It honestly had a really negative impact on my reading experience for this, so much so that I rated it lower because of it. If it wasn't written like this, I feel like I would have given it a much higher score personally. So
I can say from living with Barbara that I know she would have given it a higher score, because to see as she was reading it how frustrated she got when the tense would pull her out of a story, because I know how much you enjoyed the story and I know how frustrating it was when you kept getting pulled out of it because you were bothered. So yeah. Lauren, what about you?
Both of you that the author did this in an attempt to make readers feel like they're experiencing it firsthand, kind of. And in some instances, I feel like it was useful, but overall, I might have preferred it to be written differently. But it didn't bother me to the extent that it did Barbara.
I think I'm the only one. I have very strong opinions and point of views, and tenses used.
This is true. Moving on from there, let's talk about Helena, one of the Kirk siblings. So she's the most rebellious of the 5 Kirk siblings and follows only one set of rules, her own. In what ways do you think Helena's personality affects the family's fate throughout the war? And I'm going to let Lauren start on this one.
Lauren doesn't want to start on this one because Lauren didn't come up with a good answer.
I'm going to let Barbara start on this one.
Okay, so just a little background. Helena's the youngest out of all of the Kirk family. And I honestly believe she was one of the main reasons few of the family members were alive post-war, or like post when Germany gave up type thing. Because like she got her mom, and like she was the one who was pretty much taking care of her parents. And then when they heard from Genick that him and his wife, that they were in Italy, and Salim, that she's like, okay, like this is what we need to do to cross what was still very dangerous at that point for them. And I'm pretty sure it was still illegal. They shouldn't have been doing like crossing all these borders to get from point A to point B. She made up the plan. She was the one who led them through all of that while pregnant, mind you. So I just felt like she was really resourceful and had like this can-do attitude about herself, and her bravery was really what drew me to her character. I enjoyed reading about how she maneuvered her way through all of these situations with her, and the best part is you could really see how she grew into herself, because at the beginning, she's obviously the youngest. She was all about like the fashionista. She cared about that kind of stuff, and you just kind of see her grow into this really strong character, and taking care of not only herself but other people as well. So
I agree with a lot of what Barbara said about Helena. The only word that comes to mind is that she would belong on this podcast because she's a badass. Like her perseverance and her drive once things started to go, awry, was very impressive. And like Barbara said, maybe certain people, I'm going to say her parents, wouldn't have survived if it wasn't for her, because there were times where, she's like, hey, we need to do this. And her mom or her dad would be apprehensive about it. And she would just come back and say, well, let me rephrase this. No, this is what we're doing. Like, you don't have a choice. This is how we're doing it. And like Barbara said, I think that ended up saving their lives at the end. I'm not sure her mom and dad would have made it through this experience if it wasn't for what Helena did. So moving on from Helena, what did you guys think about the little historical factual snippets that the author put between chapters? And since Lauren didn't have a lot to say on the last one, I'm going to make her talk first on that.
I think the snippets really added to my reading experience in a positive way. I also did some more research of my own, and I found this article that had an interview with the author where she discusses the 10 years of research that went into writing the book, and it was really interesting. Maybe we can link it on our socials, I don't know, but it talks about how she traveled to all of the places to experience them for herself, and how Felicia is the last surviving member of the family who had firsthand memories of the events, which I found was super interesting. And so kind of in my researching of the historical snippets, I actually found that article that I thought was kind of worthy of mentioning. But I've always found history and historical fiction interesting. And so I think tying the two together, especially just because this was such a based on a true story book, really added to it for me.
So I'm in the same boat. I loved the little snippets between chapters. Being a huge history buff, and especially, like I said, a huge World War II fan, I really enjoyed getting that snippet to see where we were at in the war. And I feel like that's kind of what it was checking in. Because obviously, I mean, the big events that we learn in American War II, not a lot of that was discussed in this book. That stuff was happening around everything going on in this story. But, it's not like, Addie was, at the Battle of Normandy and rushing the beach, and some of those, cinematic moments we think about happening. And so it's cool to have the context, like this is happening while this is also happening. So I really liked them. I thought that they added a nice element to the book, and I think it wouldn't have been the same without them. I really liked them.
I was just going to say, not to take away from what Michael said, but you probably shouldn't refer to yourself as a World War II fan.
So I should have said World War II buff. History buff.
He loves mass murdering people. Pretty established that.
I love the Holocaust.
I mean,
anyway,
you literally said that earlier. So
no, I didn't. I literally did not. I will read you what I literally said. I said, I have loved consuming media about the Holocaust.
Michael just likes the Holocaust.
All right,
Michael just loves the Holocaust. I like reading and learning about the Holocaust. There's a distinct difference there.
Anyway, Barbara.
I thought it was a little off-putting at first, just because it took me out of the story. But I actually came to appreciate it very much. Just because it was nice to know what was going on, during the war, and then how it was affecting each character while I was reading the story. And without, honestly, those little historical snippets, like I said, yes, we studied this, but we only studied the United States point of view of it. You really don't get much of the European point of view.
Yes.
And, the U.S. didn't join until much later, so you're, missing out on all this other stuff that was happening, and you don't really get to know about, at least for our school. I'm sure everyone else in the world gets to study it all in general. I'm not quite sure. I guess I shouldn't say that, but so
the U.S. does that all the time. We are notorious in the U.S. for teaching a very specific United States perspective of history, and it's kind of messed up.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. For show. So I came to appreciate it and actually really enjoyed the little snippets, to the point where I would read it and then read a little bit about it and be go back and be okay, what is this? That's right, and go back. So.
Do a little research on your own.
Yep.
So now for an easier question, who was your favorite character? Barbara.
So I find this kind of an interesting question for this, just because these are real people. So I'd be like, which one of you guys impressed me the most? Like I felt kind of awkward judging this because they're real people. They're not these fake individuals, you know. So it's like a little uncomfortable to be like, oh, like who was the best character? But obviously I have to pick. So Helena, hands down for me, was my favorite character. Just 'cause she's just a total badass. I also enjoyed Addy just because of his connection to Brazil, since I am Brazilian. So that was kind of cool to hear about his experience with that whole situation. And also, isn't her name Melina? I believe, just because of how she went from like this new mom who had reservations of being a mom and saying like, oh, this is really hard, to honestly raising her child Felicity all by herself in this trying time and keeping her daughter safe. So that was really cool, just kind of to see her do that and how her character growth was with that, and how she also turned into this total badass, and her number one was just protecting her daughter. So
Yeah, that was actually Mila, but she is my favorite because of my connection to her as a mother and because of her badassery and doing whatever it takes to protect Felicity. Mila was my favorite, and I hadn't ever thought of it the way that you put it, Barbara, that these are real people. So now I'm like, yes, you are the best human. Like, like that's super awkward. Now I'm feeling bad for judging the rest, but Mila is who I
yeah. Sorry, yeah, Mila. I said Melina. Mila, my bad.
So my favorite was Addy. I really liked his story. I felt like in some ways he was kind of the main character of the book because we got more of his perspective than others, which kind of makes sense when you realize it's the author's grandfather. Mm-hmm. But I really enjoyed Addy's story, and yeah, I mean, it was just he was my favorite character. I liked all of them, but since this question is to pick one, I picked that one. So our next question goes back into the deeper realms. When Poland falls in September 1939, Germany takes over the West and Russia the East. Gnek, who finds himself on the eastern side, refuses to accept Soviet citizenship, thereby labeling himself a resistor. Why do you think Gnek felt so strongly about holding on to the nationality of his home country, despite the fact that it technically no longer existed? Would you have done the same? And what does your national identity mean to you? And I'll start on this one. So it's a tough question. I on one hand, I completely understand why Gnek did what he did and why. But when he looked back, I mean, the hindsight of that, knowing that that little act of rebellion of not giving up his Polish identity likely led his family down the path that they were about to go down. Which, for those of you who haven't read the book and are still listening, I mean, they got taken at night, shipped off and I mean, it was shipped off. It was awful. Like they were accused of being resistors and traitors, effectively at that point, all because of this form that he chose not to accept Soviet citizenship. And so, I mean, thinking about that in hindsight would be hard to swallow and hard to realize, like, hey, my pride made this happen. And so I don't know what I would have done in this situation. I think I'd like to think that I would have accepted the Soviet citizenship because logically that seems like the path of least resistance in this terrifying new world that they found themselves in. But I don't know. I don't know what I would have done. And as far as the last question, I mean, my national identity is important, but unlike a lot of people, I don't think it's anywhere near the most important about a person. Like your national identity shouldn't define you. While it is an important part of your upbringing and all that, I don't think it's the most important thing. What about you, Barbara?
I think what he did is just because it is who he is. To say otherwise, I feel like it would be him denying a part of who he was, and I honestly 100% would have done the same. If you were to ask me right today for me to pick between being Brazilian and being American, I would choose Brazilian. And I know how that feels. I know how he felt. At least I can empathize with him. because I was born in Brazil, but I do live in the States, obviously, and I've lived here longer than I have now, than in Brazil, but I still identify as a Brazilian first. I mean, I grew up with that. That is a part of what makes me me. So I think just to deny that, would feel like him lying to himself about it. So I completely understand where he's coming from. I mean, obviously, hindsight 2020, like he wished he wouldn't have done that. And given that option, if someone was pointing a gun in my head, like it might be different, but I feel like if I were to deny that, I would be denying who I am. Like I'm not embarrassed and I'm not ashamed of where I came from, and I feel like that's how he was feeling at the time, because these people just came over and took all that from him, and he was like, you can't take that from me. So I can understand where he's coming from. So that's my feeling towards that.
I mean, do you guys feel like he had any kind of concept of what would happen if he made that choice, though, is my thing. Like, I'm with Michael on the fact that, like, my national identity it's important, but it's not everything. And in that particular situation, I feel like I would probably just do whatever I had to do to keep myself and my family safe. But I guess like Michael, you said, like, his pride cost his family to kind of go down the rabbit hole, so to speak. Like, do you guys think that he had, like, I just feel like he had to have known that something bad was going to come of it.
I don't think he actually knew, because he was like, because he even mentioned, like, he just glanced through that question without even thinking about it and just like said, no, obviously I'm not. And then when he was getting questioned about it, he's like, okay, obviously they were trying to weed out the non-believers or the resistors or the people who are going to give us issues here. So I don't think that was his thinking whatsoever. I honestly don't think they realized the hate that these people had for them either. I think that took a while for them to be like, you know what, this is truly a war about how much hatred they have for us. And I don't think that was in his upfront on his point of view, being like, oh, okay, like this question is just kind of a stupid question. He just kind of wrote it off until it came back to bite him in the ass.
Yeah,
I think
that's right. I mean, that was kind of what was mentioned in the book. He didn't really think about the consequences of that until the consequences were in his face. And then he immediately realized, like, oh man, that's, I should have done this differently. But in the moment, I think he thought it was a pretty benign question, and he didn't identify as Soviet. So why would he have marked that? Obviously, it didn't have a great outcome, but I don't think he thought about that. It was like, oh, if I don't mark this, something terrible will happen.
But I mean, what's to say if he hadn't and he'd stayed there, he wouldn't have died either. Like, it's one of those what if questions that you'll wonder for the rest of your life, which happens to everyone. Like, if I would have done this differently, how would this have turned out?
Yeah.
I had forgotten that he had said that he just glossed over it. I was just thinking, like, logically in that time, like, I just feel like the thought would have run through your mind, but maybe not.
For the next question, was your appreciation for this story enhanced by the author's note?
And I'm going to let Barbara go first on this one.
Oh, yes. I absolutely love that she did that. I'm so happy that she did. I wanted more after the fact. Like, it took me a while to get into the book, but, like, once I did, like, and it ended, I was like, no. Like, I want to know more about them. Like, where did they end up? Like, did they all hang out in the world? Did they move to countries? Did they ever, like, see each other? Were they all in the same place again? Because obviously they were such a close-knit family. Like, I believe Addie was the only one who didn't live in Radon when all of this started. So it's just I just wanted more, and I wanted to know more about them, because I feel like I was so invested. So I'm so happy that she added that, because I was just, like, salivating on the mouth for more information about what happened to them.
So I'm with Barbara on that. I really liked the author's note. It was a nice context to, like, how all this kind of wrapped into her family and her experiences. And And I mean, it also led, at least it led Barbara and I to be doing more research. Like the other night, we were sitting here doing like genealogical research on the Kirk family to try to find like stuff of these people. And so I think it was good. It was a good thing to add. The book wouldn't have ended the way that it did without having that as like it's not the prologue, an epilogue. Mm-hmm. Almost an epilogue to the story.
I loved it. I think like Barbara said, makes me want to know more. I loved visiting her memories in that way, like having her talk about like her grandfather and like being at his house and describing it, and like, I don't know, that whole thing made me like nostalgic for an experience that I never really had. As far as like being told stories about family history by a grandfather, but it was cool going there into her little world for a little bit.
So to think that we don't ask or haven't asked our grandparents like what they've experienced until I feel like it's a little too late. Like this book kind of made me realize how I wish I would have asked my grandparents, like, tell me about you and like your experiences as a kid and growing up and how the world was different to what my world is. And it kind of like made me sad that I didn't do that, because now I want to know about my family, because I mean, I'm curious to know, like, were my grandparents at all involved or great grandparents involved in stuff like this that happened that I'm not even aware of, and now I won't be aware of. So
since if you don't already know, Michael and I are siblings. And
after a year you don't know that, what are you doing?
I mean, I'm just saying, maybe we only said it in like the first episode, I think. So if they are listening currently, then they don't know who we are. Anyway, Michael's my brother, and so we grew up in the same childhood type situation. I feel like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but I feel like we got a pretty good history of my mom's mom, who passed away a few years ago. She would talk about like how things were when she was a little girl and like her parents and the history there. And we would get, I feel like I got stories from her growing up, but then a little bit less on my dad's side, as far as just they were a little bit more conservative. My grandma on that side, I just feel like I don't know as much. So it would be cool to, and I don't know how you go about doing this, but like ancestry.com it, or like, I don't know, go about figuring it out, because like Barbara said, I feel like, you know, my Grammy on my mom's side has passed away already, and Graham on my dad's side is older, and her memory isn't like it used to be. And so I'm wishing now that we would have taken some of the opportunities to kind of have more of those stories be passed along.
Yep, no, I agree with that. Barbara brought up a very good point. It does make you think that, or make you wish that you'd had some of these conversations, maybe that it's now too late to have. So, moving on from that, the next question we're talking about is about Addie and Eliska, the woman that he meets when he's on the way to Brazil. Did you find it strange that he would fall in love despite the circumstances going on in the world? And in what ways do you think Eliska and Addie's feelings for one another would have been similar or different had they met under more normal circumstances? And I will let Lauren take this one first.
Eliska is actually pronounced Eliska with an SH. Not that it matters.
If it didn't matter, you wouldn't have corrected me.
Sorry. I feel like that it was like they were grasping at straws for connection during a scary and uncertain time. And so I think that they did. I mean, they needed that, like in the time that they were in. And I think under more normal circumstances, I don't think they would have chosen each other, which becomes clear later on when it doesn't end up working out.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of found it a little weird, but I understand that some people need that sort of connection during times like this. Like, I mean, it's like, I feel like it's a complete opposite of what I would do. I would be like, no one talk to me. Like, I don't want to talk to anyone. I already have my family. And so I thought it was kind of like, whoa, okay. But I understand why. I also don't believe they would have fallen in love if they had met under normal, quote unquote, circumstances. I just, like Lauren said, I really do think they were just both craving that type of affection and that sense of a stability in such an unknown scenario where that made sense at the time. And obviously, once they were more on stable grounds, and they just kind of naturally just drifted apart because they had nothing in common, I don't think.
So my answer is similar to you guys. Is I think that, I mean, I didn't find it strange that would happen. I think that, they needed each other in that time, and they, for different reasons. But at the end of the day, the thing that held them together is that they were both in this awful situation, and I think they both needed a distraction from reality, and that provided that for them. And I don't think that they would have fallen in love under different circumstances. And I think that, like Lauren mentioned, I think that they kind of realized that, like, the way they weren't really meant for each other, and that's why they ended up breaking off their engagement. But yeah, she was a distraction from reality. But at the same time, later on, he realized that he didn't like that. He needed to talk about and deal with what was happening to his family. And Alishka didn't ever want to hear about it because she didn't like how sad he looked when he talked about that. So yeah, I think that it makes sense why they got together, but I'm glad that they didn't end up together because I don't think that was long run meant to be.
Obviously.
Clearly, since he married the American. Oh yeah, no, I went out of that in the notes just to be petty.
So we have character reference, and Michael put in Alishka to make sure we pronounce that correctly.
Capital SH, just to make sure.
I'm so glad that you did that. It's also Genic, not Genic. But
yeah, I said Genic as well.
And Herta and Jakob.
Yeah.
So,
Jakob.
In the spirit of Michael not mispronouncing his name, this next question I wrote, and I want to Barbara.
No, I would love to hear you.
No,
please. No. I'm not going to say it. I guess we're just going to sit here.
I'll try it.
So let's talk about Brazil's ambassador.
She's going to try, and your ass just interrupts her.
I'll let her read the name. I thought I was reading the question still. Go ahead, Lauren. Read the whole thing.
So rude. Let's talk about Brazil's ambassador to France, Luiz Martin de Souza Dantas.
Yeah, close enough.
Did I do it? Was I close?
Yeah.
Now Barbara's going to say it so we get the real one.
No, it's fine.
Please continue, Barbara.
Why?
Say his name. I want to hear you say it. Because
it's not awkward.
Say my name. Say my name.
Well, and then all the Brazilian people are like, she said it wrong.
Anyway, so I won't make Barbara. I want to talk about throughout the book. There weren't a lot of historical figures that were mentioned that I didn't know about already. This, Luiz Martin de Souza Dantas. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but he was one of them. And what he did for Addie in the book was amazing because Addie is in France, Toulouse, and he is trying to figure out a way to get out of Europe because he knows what's happening and he can sense it, and he hears from some other people that this guy is giving visas to Jews and not marking them Jewish and letting them escape the country and go to Brazil. And that's eventually where Addie ends up. Is the whole book actually ends with the whole family in Brazil, but Addie gets there first. And that's because of this man. And so then I was like, I'm going to look him up, see what else he did. And I found out, like, holy crap, this guy saved so many people during World War II. He was posthumously awarded the Righteous Among Nations Israeli Supreme Court in 2003. And for those of you that don't know what that is people who are recognized for the things that they did to save Jewish lives, especially during this time period. And it's estimated that he saved roughly 800 people. 800 people. 425 of them are confirmed to be Jewish, but he also saved homosexual communists at the time who were just trying to escape what was going on with the Nazis. And, we were talking earlier about, characters that were doing things that could potentially hurt them. And, what this guy did did end his career. He was there as a volunteer diplomat, effectively. But the president of Brazil, who was a dictator, was
He wasn't a dictator at this point.
at
for
this
the
point
record.
he wasn't yet.
No.
Okay,
Not yet.
so the president of Brazil was pissed that he was sending all the back to Brazil, mainly because at the beginning of the war, Brazil was on the wrong side of the table.
No, we were neutral.
I thought
He was rubbing elbows, but he was neutral. He was neutral the time.
okay, then he decided to go on the Ally side at the end.
Hitler offered him to become a part of the Axis, and he was like, "Nah, son."
Anyway, so he got in a lot of trouble when he got summoned back to Brazil. Was forced to leave his role. He went back to Paris after that and lived the rest of his life there. But yeah, I thought he was really cool. That's why I wanted. I don't know if Barbara, if you have anything else you wanted to add.
Louise Marchine?
Yes.
I mean, no, I knew about Getúlio Vargas from my family. Like, I was always curious about Brazil's role in World War II, just because obviously living here in the U.S., I didn't get to study Brazil's part in it, and I was always really curious about it. So I asked, my family members who actually did study it. And this guy's name didn't come up. So, like, when I read about him in the book, I was, like, really surprised and very curious about it. So I ended up, like, Googling more about him and stuff like that. And that just kind of made me feel a little bit better, just to know that there were people who were willing to help and helped so many people because of that, and actually helped a character in this book. So I thought that was really interesting and a little piece of Brazil history that I wasn't aware of. So
yeah, I mean, it was very, very cool. One of two Brazilians to get that award, the Righteous Among the Nations. The other was a woman who was like she was worked at the consulate in Germany and was sending people to Brazil who were Jewish and not marking them as Jews, which Hitler required at the time. And so yeah, it's pretty neat, pretty big honor for him to be recognized. And obviously, he didn't do it for the recognition; he did it because it's the right thing to do, and that was pretty cool. Lauren, did you have anything to add about him?
No, just that I learned something that I didn't know before, kind of like you said. Because, like Barbara mentioned earlier, in American textbooks, we don't learn about the badassery that happens in Brazil. So I thought it was super interesting, and I also kind of Googled him and to learn a little bit more. It sounds like Michael learned more than I did. But I've studied the Holocaust quite a bit, and it was nice to. It was it was nice to learn about another hero situation. I thought that was,
which Wikipedia shouldn't be a source that you should be using, but that's fine.
Is Michael using Wikipedia?
Yeah, he did.
I did. I found a lot.
Your teachers are rolling in their graves right now.
Question: was the ending satisfying? Did the book change you? And did you learn something? And I'm going to let Lauren take this one first.
So the ending was satisfying in the sense that obviously it had a happy ending where everyone was reunited. I still think it's important to note that how terribly uncommon this type of ending was. Obviously, it was really special that family got through what they got through and that they made it out okay with all of their family members. But that was not typical of those days. I definitely wanted to learn more about the family and where they ended up, especially after the author's note. I wouldn't say that it changed me necessarily, but it did make me hold my little baby a little tighter after reading it, and I felt a lot of feels. And I also just felt a lot of gratitude for the blessings and the fact that, like, our lives today are relatively totally easy compared to what they had to go through, and just the fact that, like, I don't know, like I can't fathom having to decide between giving my baby to a stranger and surviving, and just, I don't know. So it was satisfying.
With Lauren, the
Full
ending
stop.
was satisfying. Full stop. I agree the ending was satisfying. It was nice that it had a happy ending, like Lauren, very uncommon, but it made this story unique, and I thought that was cool to get that perspective. It was a good ending. I wish that you kind of want more. And I know Barbara's going to talk about that a little bit, that it would have been nice to hear about what happened to them later on. Like, I mean, it kind of just abruptly ended. You get a little bit more info in the author's note, but it would have been cool to learn a little bit more about what happened to the family after they got to Brazil and all officially reunited. And even to hear more about Jacob and Bella too. Them, we know that they got to America and that, they were talking about going to be neighbors but you didn't hear a whole lot happen. He got a job as a photographer. That was really, they touched on it, that they had another kid. But anyway, I really liked the ending. I would say the book changed me in the sense that, my foundation hasn't been shaken and become a new person after reading it, but my beliefs and my thoughts about World War II and all this have changed. And I think that it changed me in the sense, like Lauren said, that, you, like anything when you read from this period in history, like when you come away from it, you hold your loved ones a little bit tighter, and you're a little more grateful that you live in a time where it's not like this. And you don't have to wonder if you'll be alive tomorrow or if the police are going to come and take you because of who you are. So yeah, and I did learn a lot. I looked up a lot of things. Obviously, we just talked about one of them, but it was really good. I love historical fiction for that reason. I feel like I always come away from the book knowing more than I do. So,
Michael, were you talking about this book or about Twilight? Because you were talking about Jacob and Bella, and this one is Jakob and Bella.
And Bella's not even her real name.
Well, that was a good joke. Good joke, Barbara. Barbara, what did you think about the ending?
I mean, was the ending satisfying? Yes, in the sense that, I'm happy that they were all together for the most part, except for Jakob and Bella. And like Michael mentioned, we didn't really get to know or hear more about them after they in the U.S. Like, I would have liked to have kind of a little bit more about that, but I would have been okay with a longer book just to kind of give a little bit more about like what happened to them after the fact, just kind of like they, were they officially down, and if they ended up ever going back to Radom, or if they ever stepped foot in. I think she only mentioned Addie, that he never went back there. But I guess maybe I'm just a curious person. I just really wanted to know a little bit more about them after the fact. And yeah, I mean, the book changed me, and I mean, no, not like you guys mentioned, like I, didn't have this whole epiphany about anything in general and stuff like that. If anything, it just kind of made me more curious to know kind of more about this, and maybe me read more stories like this about these families that survived these and maybe didn't survive these, obviously, like Lauren mentioned. And I believe the author did mention that out of all the Jewish people that lived, I don't remember the exact number, but only 300 of them survived. So if that just gives you an idea, like what this family survived is just astronomical. Like, it's a one shot, honestly. I can't say for certain if there's any that all members of them survived like this. Like, it's just,
The odds were not in their favor.
right. It's just mind boggling to think about that little one did survive, and you can see their relationships, like Bella's family, none of them did. I believe she was the only one from her immediate family, obviously, that didn't. And same with Adam, which is Lena's. I don't believe but like one of his brothers survived. And that's just really sad to think about. And how fortunate this family was. And I'm sure they would also, say how very fortunate they were, like that. And did I learn something? Obviously, yeah, I learned because I wanted to know more, and my curiosity, and definitely kind of want to read more books like this based off actual people's history and not just a historical fiction where it's like, oh, well, we did research on what could have happened these people, but actually what happened to them and get a firsthand experience, kind of like how she did with this.
So I know Barbara was talking about the Jews in Radom specifically, and I was able to find the numbers for Poland as a whole. So before this happened, there were 3.3 Jewish people living in Poland. 91% of them were killed, and the survivors were only 300,000.
It's just
the fact that this whole family was from Poland. It's a 1 in a million chance that they all made it, but it made this story even more special. So
yeah.
So, like, having actually been there and toured the concentration camps and just you just like walk the different like sleeping barracks, and that you can feel like it's just a chilling, I don't even know. And you obviously, like, you're giving tours by these people who are experts in it, and they're telling these atrocious stories about what happened there. And I mean, the work camps were similar that these characters experienced, and it's just unfathomable to think that anybody made it out alive from that.
We made it to the end of our second part discussion. So let's talk about our individual scores.
So I gave the book an 8.5 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. As I've said numerous times for the different reasons, I really liked the book, and so that's why I rated it so highly and gave it an 8.5 out of 10.
What about you, Barbara?
Mine was a 7.5, and the only reason why it was as low as it was just because of the tense and point of view that she used. If she hadn't done that, honestly, I probably would have given it an 8.5, if not a 9. But it was just really off-putting for me. So.
And Lauren?
I gave it a 7.75. And that's just based on how I've rated other things I needed to like make it perfect. But I picked that because it only got demoted a little bit because I really wanted more in-depth characters. And I realized like now that that sounds awkward because they're actual people.
They're real people.
And I'm sure that the real people were very in-depth, but the author, I feel like, chose to give us more, I don't know how to describe it other than like more width rather than depth, like spread out all of the facts and different things about these people, and gave us lots of information just in a more shallow way, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was really kind of why I rated it the way that I did, because I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the story. I really enjoyed the learning about the topic. I think that it's cool that it was true. I just wish that she would have delved deeper into even just a few of the characters.
And so because of all of those scores, our group score for this one ended up being a 7.9 out of 10. I want to give a special shout out again to @Scram13 for recommending such a great book. Thank you so much for listening. We are Badass Literature Society. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, let us know on Apple Podcasts, wherever you guys listen to your podcast. Give us a rating, give us a review. That really helps us get noticed.
If you're not already, follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Our handle is @BadassLitPod. And don't forget to be on the lookout for our upcoming drawing that we're doing. That'll be up soon after this podcast release. See you guys next month. I'm Michael.
I'm Barbara.
And I'm Lauren.
And we are Badass Literature Society 1 year later.
We made it.
We made it. See you guys next month. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.